We praise God once again for this blessed day. The good Lord has given us to meet together, to study God's Word, and to discern the messages that He is giving us day after day. These wise sayings, these wise men, who through divine wisdom that they received and their experience of life are able to give us such words of wisdom, so that following these words, these messages, we can be found faithful on our path of righteousness into God's kingdom. The wise man uses beautiful illustrations from the nature. Wise men are called wise because they can see even the simple things of life and draw from there such valuable spiritual lessons. As we look at these two verses today in Proverbs 25, verse 13 and 14, we will see God's messages for us. Reading His word, verse 13, like the cold of snow in time of harvest, He is a faithful messenger to those who send Him, for He refreshes the soul of His masters. And verse 14, whoever falsely boasts of giving is like clouds and wind without rain. The wise man seems to be a very close observer of nature, of the heavenly world, and also things going on this earth. The harvest time. And in most places, harvest time is when the climate is hot, because the heat of the sun would ripen the grain and enable its harvest. For we do not harvest in rain. Seed that is soaked in water will be of no value to provide food. And so the harvest is scheduled, is planned when the sun's heat is strong. But along with the needed heat for harvest, the laborers who work the harvesting certainly find it discomforting, and working in the heat of the sun is certainly not easy experience. I can remember going to Israel, the country of Israel, and traveling there to visit important sites in biblical history. They said it was summer, so we should come ready. And with our Indian summers in mind, I went with hardly any warm clothes. But the evenings are cool in Palestine, but the days are hot. The sun shines very strong. And because it was a hot season, I went with sandals, and after the trip for about 2 weeks, I could see how my leg, which was covered by the strap, was pale, but the rest of the leg actually turned darker in color, so showing how strong and intense the heat is. Working in such heat certainly can be very discomforting, needs much effort and concentration, and commitment, because you are bringing forth and harvesting the grain which is needed to feed your family and maybe sell it to others. But in such times where things are hard, certainly anybody would like something which is refreshing. And we all certainly crave in the hot season for a cold drink. And how refreshing it is to have a cold drink during a hot summer season. This phrase, cold of snow in time of harvest, is not talking about the snow in the summer season. Snow or cold season will not assist in the harvest and not a time for harvesting. Here it is talking about a cold drink. And now, how do you get a cold drink? Back then, there were no refrigerators to cool the drinks and carry around. But what they did was they brought the snow from the peaks of high mountains and they would store it in caves of snow, where in deep caves where the heat of the sun would not penetrate, they would keep it there and then they would transport it to wherever they need, thus trying to make maybe your drink cold or whatever. The principle that we're learning here is when there is hard work, especially in the heat of the sun, discomforting experiences, a cold drink certainly is refreshing. It invigorates our bodies. Thus, this experience of a cool drink in a hot summer illustrates the blessing of a faithful messenger to those who sent him. A messenger who carries a message should be faithful. He should know what he has heard and deliver it exactly in toto without making any changes. Thus, when a message is carried rightly, it would be a blessing to those who have sent it and also to those who receive it. A faithful messenger is certainly well loved, and they would choose such people who are faithful in carrying such confidential messages, in doing important work. Faithfulness is a quality that is seen in people who work, in having a relationship, and in all aspects of life. Faithfulness is much sought after attribute, quality in anybody's life, but especially in those who are delivering messages. I remember seeing a write-up about a faithful bell ringer. In a school, especially in our context in India, we have the bell to start the school and a bell to change a period and a bell to bring the school to an end. A bell ringer is very important, as we know. And in this particular school, and the write-up about this bell ringer when he is retiring, They are acclaiming how faithful he was during his many long years of service. One who was faithful to the dot. He would make sure that he was always on time. Nothing mattered to him more than ringing the bell at the right time. Likewise, another humble worker that we often do not see in action today is a messenger or a postman. A postman who supplies mail, who delivers mail, who collects mail from the post box and send it to where it should go, and to deliver mail as it is to be distributed. And the work even of a postman in the years gone by, we see how important to deliver a message. When you send a message through a post, you are putting your trust upon the postal system and the people working there so that your mail will reach as it changes hands of faithful workers. A person who works faithfully is highly prized. And such a person who works faithfully is certainly a blessing to those who is sending the message and also those who are receiving the message. But such faithfulness in carrying a message well illustrates the work of an evangelist or a pastor. When Jesus called his disciples and told them to carry the message, the good news of the gospel to the world, Jesus was entrusting this important work. But he chose simple, ordinary human beings, men who were fishermen, who had no formal education, men who came from lower strata of society. And such men were called not because they were eligible. Ellen White tells us, when God chooses somebody to be his messenger, God does not see that person's qualifications, but rather God sees those who are willing to learn, willing to do whatever work they are given. It is willingness, not those who are already trained or equipped, but God chooses simple, ordinary people whom he will equip them to do that work, to go and preach the gospel. God chose these humble people not because they were qualified. There were many others, even in the Jewish society at the time, highly educated, the rabbis and the Pharisees and the scribes, and these others who had full knowledge of the Holy Scriptures, but God didn't choose them. He chose humble, simple fishermen, uneducated farmers, and even prophets in the Old Testament were likewise uneducated people, except a few like Daniel, who has education, being trained. But if not, most of them were simple, humble people. But God equipped them, God empowered them with the Holy Spirit, and they became faithful bearers of God's message. The disciples, during their time of training, in their association with Jesus, they came to understand the truth and the gospel on a first-hand experience basis. They experienced the truth. They saw Jesus as he preached. He saw Jesus living that message, what he preached. This is what touched and changed and transformed these humble disciples to become great messengers. Such kind of messengers are certainly out there to accomplish the work that is given to them. And we see these disciples in the New Testament or the prophets of the Old Testament did not care for any pleasures for themselves. Some of them were even ready to give up their lives. And if you see the 12 apostles, they went to various parts of the world, save John, the Revelator, who had a natural death, but all others had faced unnatural death, crucified, beaten, beheaded, speared, whatever may be, they did give their lives for the truth they preached. For they knew the one who sent them has promised them that even if they should lose their lives for his sake, he will give them life eternal. And so these humble messengers were willing to give up their lives. And many, even for the sake of the truth, in the early Christian church periods, when the persecution was severe by the Romans and others, they were willing to give their lives. That is how a true messenger would risk his life, even in carrying the message. And Paul, in the struggles that he faced, tells about how many times he was beaten for the sake of the gospel that he preached, how many times he was shipwrecked, and how many times he had to suffer being stoned, left to die. We have such great examples of God's faithful servants. And certainly they did receive help from those who supported them. And Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 16, verse 17 and 18, in all his struggles was able to acknowledge those who helped him. I am glad about the coming of Stephanus, Fortunatus, and Achaicus, for what was lacking in your part they supplied. For they refreshed my spirit and yours, therefore acknowledge such men. Assisting Paul in his ministry in sharing the gospel, he had the help of those whom he named here, whose presence was like a refreshing to him, like a cool drink to a worker in the hot summer months. These people who assisted Paul, who helped him, who came and supported him and joined with him. Certainly there is place for such people who are always ever willing to help God's messengers. Again, writing in the same way to Philippians chapter 2, verse 25 to 30, yet I considered it necessary to send to you Epaphroditus, my brother, fellow worker, and fellow soldier, but your messenger, the one who ministered to my needs. Paul, unable to visit all the churches that he has established, he would send those who are trained, his associates. And here is Epaphroditus, a fellow soldier, and says, he is a messenger, the one who ministered to my needs, the one who took care of him, is now sent out as a messenger. Verse 26, since he was longing for you all and was distressed because you had heard that he was sick. For indeed he was sick almost unto death. But God had mercy on him, and could not only on him, but on me also, lest I should have sorrow upon sorrow. Therefore I send him the more eagerly, that you may see him again, you may rejoice, and I may be less sorrowful. Receive him, therefore, in the Lord with all gladness, and hold such man in esteem. Because for the work of Christ, he came close to that death, not regarding his life, to supply what was lacking in your service towards me. Paul here exalts the ministry of Epaphroditus in sending him to the Philippians, tells them how he was sick even to the point of death. But he was one who was willing and gladly bearing the message, even though he was overcome by sickness and other such weaknesses, yet he was one who rejoiced, who was willing to minister to Paul, and how much the Philippians desired for him to visit them. And here are such people that Paul commends for being such wonderful companions in the ministry. Certainly there is a place for a good messenger in the cause of God. In verse 12, we see the wise man comparing someone who contrasting rather the joy of having a reliable messenger, one who is much desired in sharing the gospel, is contrasted with disappointment of boasting and using vivid imagery. A faithful messenger brings refreshment like cool water on a hot harvest day, bringing peace to his master. But you have on the other side someone who boasts of gifts but does not deliver. We have people who behave like this, who promise us, sometimes recognizing your good work, your hard work, that he would give you gifts and so on, but he would not deliver it. Just like, and the wise man compares to, again, something out in nature, to clouds. It's so wonderful, interesting to watch clouds floating in the sky, and especially when you travel in aeroplanes and go high above the clouds to see how the clouds are strewn in the skies. So beautiful to look at. But he's referring to certain clouds which do not bring rain. There are clouds that bring rain, and usually these are little darker in color, grayish. And these clouds, which carry water droplets, when the temperature cools, would condense and give rain. But there are clouds which are very much white, but they do not give rain. They simply float in the air. There are such people who have a form or an appearance of doing a work faithfully, but they only offer false hope and frustration. They do not do their work with integrity and dependability. And their communication is not truthful. And so we have people who do not fit to be those who work as a faithful communicator. A faithful communicator or a messenger is one who is compared to a refreshing drink to the soul of his master who is working and toiling in the hot sun. So that a trustworthy person is certainly desired to bring joy and happiness to the employees, to his family, his friends, and even as a gospel messenger, one who brings promise, one who brings comfort and joy through his message that he shares. But if you are like a person who is like clouds blown by the wind without rain, one who boasts of gifts, but he does not give, such boaster who promises much, but he delivers nothing. They try to create an anticipation, but that turns into disappointment. These kinds of people, like these clouds that are floating, is also likened to, especially in the summer season, when you have the hot sun's heat, you have a mirage, as if showing that there is water, but actually it is only a reflection of light. It looks like water, but there is no water, especially in hot summer months. Certainly, that is only a frustrating false hope. People who speak but cannot accomplish. People who make an appearance but have really no integrity. Such people are certainly worthless. And so the wise man is telling us and contrasting these two kinds of people that we have in this world: those who are faithful, those who are honest, those who will do their work efficiently, dependably. But then we have those who are only appearing to be, but never try to deliver what they promise. Paul, writing in 1 Corinthians chapter 4, he talks about this is how one should regard us as servants of Christ and stewards of the mysteries of God. Moreover, it is required of stewards that they be found faithful. As stewards, as servants of God, we are called to be faithful. As messengers, charged with the responsibility of sharing the gospel to the world, the good news of salvation, we should do it faithfully and honestly. Such faithful stewards certainly are ambassadors for Christ, for they carry the good news, urging people to be reconciled to God and to follow the path of righteousness. And certainly God is pleased with such workers who carry on his work. And so Paul makes a special appeal to the Corinthians in chapter 5 that we should be such messengers of reconciliation as ambassadors for Christ. We should be faithful to do God's work faithfully and honestly. But on the other side, we have those who are like clouds without any rain, blown by wind here and there, moving around, seem to be presenting great hope, but they do not deliver what they promise. They seem to be generous, but they're very disappointing. Jude, talking about this in chapter 1, verse 12, he says, "These are hidden reefs at your love feasts, as they feast with you without fear, shepherds feeding themselves like waterless clouds, swept along by winds, fruitless trees in late autumn, twice dead, and they're uprooted." Jude is giving them straight warning. If you are like such people who are shepherds only feeding themselves and not caring for the sheep, you are like waterless clouds swaying, moving here and there along with the wind. But you are like fruitless trees. You're only dead and ready to be uprooted. Serious warning to such people who behave in manner that is not worthy of the call. In 2 Peter chapter 2:17, Peter calls them, verse 17, "These are waterless springs and mists driven by a storm. For them, the gloom of utter darkness has been reserved." These people who appear to be springs but have no water, look like clouds but have no rain, finally they will be thrown into utter darkness, which has been reserved for them. Such hypocrites, he says, be careful of such people who appear to you like teachers who are only teaching you falsehood and no truth. Certainly, these false teachers will have no part on the day when the Lord comes and says, "Oh, yes, we have prophesied in your name." Jesus says, "I don't know your names. Be cast out. I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness." And so, the admonition that comes to us today is to be like a faithful messenger of God and not to be like a waterless cloud, departing from the truth, only living a lawless life, but making an appearance as though of great promise. Let God's Spirit guide us to be like messengers who are faithful in carrying on God's work, leading many people into God's kingdom. Certainly, these two groups of people will be seen and known, but you have to watch out who are the faithful and who are the false. God bless you and have a blessed day. Elder Alberto, maybe we can have the closing prayer.